busy last year raising capital. We had a very successful financing with great investors that puts us in a position, having come public just in January, to have capital, we think, into 2026 and through the pivotal trials that we're going to run on both programs. We raised a total of $180 million over the last year, both through a private and then our go public transaction. Both of our strategic partners are investors. Medtronic put $50 million of that $180 million in. RTW and Perceptive are key shareholders. RTW was critical in our recent financing. Perceptive was a founding shareholder in the business and has really invested in each round that we've done up until coming public. So just a few comments, and we can talk more about this. We think the business model is critical and timely. The idea here is to impact patients faster by leveraging the shared resources of an innovation-oriented company like Orchestra, but of our major strategic partners like Medtronic and Terumo. As we said, the business model here focuses on royalties, which we know out of the biopharma space can be incredibly lucrative if you have the right programs, the right partners. The key thing, as I talked about, is for us to outsource commercialization to companies that are much better positioned to do it than we are, and to hopefully develop our pipeline further, and we can talk more about that. But what's really important to understand is for our partners, for the Medtronics, Terumos, and other medical device companies, we think the model is timely because all of these companies need to drive, as you know, top-line growth, but are challenged in terms of deploying R&D dollars and resources to do that with new internal or external programs. Interesting to note that the top 20 medical device companies on average spend only 7% of revenue on R&D. That compares to 20% for the top 20 biopharma pharmaceutical companies. And so that really limits what medical device companies can spend. And so our model allows our partners to really enable significant potential future growth while outsourcing to us the development work and costs and minimizing P&L dilution. So we have two great partnerships. We'll talk more about this. I'll focus just for a minute on these are significant revenue shares. While we can talk about the details, our partnership with Medtronic offers an opportunity as we pursue development and commercialization of BackBeat for treatment of hypertension just in the existing pacemaker population. Our revenue share positions Orchestra to receive between $500 and $1,600 per device that Medtronic sells, and that's without any change to reimbursement that's established in the pacemaker market. And really, we're talking Medtronic as the global dominant market leader. This is a core business for Medtronic. In the US, they have north of 50% market share and generally the market leader worldwide. With Terumo, and Medtronic invested, as I noted, $50 million in the company over the last year. Terumo paid $30 million upfront and invested in Orchestra. And here we have a 10 to 15% royalty plus a per unit payment for drugs. So our revenue share model is exciting when we have these significant revenue shares and with strong partners for differentiated technology. Our technologies are built on platforms. So as we can talk about, BackBeat is our partnership with Medtronic targets hypertension in the pacemaker population, but there's significant potential to expand that for high-risk hypertension and for heart failure. Our Virtue program targets both coronary and peripheral indications, but we retain the technology rights for other indications outside of vascular, and we think there's significant opportunities. And the last thing I would just love to note, and we can turn it back to discussion, we've built an incredible team to do what we need to do. Just our senior leadership, and we're north of 60 employees, but this is our senior leadership, collectively actually has well over 250 years experience developing and bringing products through approval. It's a great team that spans both medical device and biopharma expertise. We've got a great board that has the same both medical device and biopharma expertise with experience in private and public market company development. So we're really proud of the business model, the key lead programs, the pipeline, the partnerships, and the team we have in place. And now it's really about execution. Hopefully that provides a good overview that we can get started with, and love to address some questions you might have about the business.
Well, great. Thank you for that overview. So let's start with BackBeat. We do view it as your most important product. Implantable pacemakers are really the preferred way to treat patients with various arrhythmias over drugs. the most common being bradycardia, which is patients with whose heartbeats are too slow. Can you describe the physiologic response, the pacing algorithm that you're using aims to achieve in order to reduce blood pressure in patients with hypertension?
I'd be happy to, and excited to talk about BackBeat, and also believe both our programs are exciting. I'm going to jump ahead in the slide deck here because I think you asked a question. I apologize. I'm going to stop the share in this deck. But so important points about BackBeat. One, we don't change the device at all. So you talked about pacemakers being standard of care for bradycardia, for other indications that we would having to deal with arrhythmia. BackBeat is a technology that can be deployed through the same existing device. Medtronic is integrating and tested our algorithm so we can go into the clinic. We'll use their top-of-the-line devices to conduct our pivotal study and ultimately the commercialization. So we don't change the device, we don't change the implant, we don't change where the leads go, as physicians now are pursuing, and Medtronic's the leader in this, physiologic conduction system pacing with new lead positions. BackBeat, we think, will work just as well. The patients we're starting to treat and that we've treated today already need that implant for an indication like bradycardia. BackBeat now takes advantage of this existing device, and what we're doing is targeting the same things that pharmaceutical therapy for hypertension target. And there's really three things that BackBeat targets. One is cardiac preload, the other is cardiac afterload or total peripheral resistance, and then finally autonomic function or sympathetic tone. And all of these are targeted by drugs as well to treat hypertension. We do all three with one therapy. We target preload by actually reducing the timing between atrial and ventricular contractions. And this actually reduces ventricular filling. There's a mechanism called Frank-Starling, which means the less filling, the less contraction. So you bring down cardiac preload, and that has a pronounced effect on blood pressure. You can see an immediate and pronounced effect on blood pressure. The key to our intellectual property and our mechanism, though, is how do you sustain that reduction in blood pressure? So what we do is we use variability or modulation of that first mechanism, and that one prevents a compensatory response in an uplift in afterload or peripheral resistance and in sympathetic tone. So over time, you're actually affecting afterload or TPR and reducing sympathetic tone by dialing in these lower preloads. So we're hitting all those targets and doing that with really the same device through pacing.
Well, great. So let's review the key findings of your clinical data to date. You have accumulated human data from 3 studies, starting with a small acute study, followed by a larger multi-center open label prospective study, Moderato 1, and then, as you mentioned, the double-blind randomized pilot study, Moderato 2. So can you walk us through the clinical findings thus far and how this informs the design of the upcoming pivotal study?
Sure, I can. And I wanted to pull up some slides that weren't in the deck we started with, but I will get those as we talk through this. So first off, we conducted two clinical studies with BackBeat, Moderato 1 and Moderato 2. And most importantly, we're targeting the same patients that we will have in our pivotal study that's going to start later this year. These are pacemaker-indicated patients with hypertension that's not controlled despite medical therapy. In Moderato 2, our randomized study, we targeted patients with at least one drug background therapy. You'll find because these are older patients, average age in a pacemaker population is in the early 70s, we found in that patient population they were on 3.3 drugs on average. So these tend to be more heavily medicated patients, but their blood pressure is difficult to treat. Actually, it's one of the key challenges. Keep in mind that as a comorbidity, hypertension is the #1 comorbidity in the pacemaker population. Over 70% of patients, we estimate worldwide, probably higher in the United States because we have stricter guidelines, have hypertension. So it's the #1 comorbidity in that population. Moderato 1 looked at a single arm study. I'll focus on Moderato 2. The data in Moderato was great, but I think the randomized data is more important. As we are talking here, I'll pull up the slides I wanted to share with you on Moderato 2. So once again, because all these patients need a pacemaker, the therapy lends itself very nicely to a double-blind placebo-controlled study, a randomized study, because everyone's getting the pacemaker. We have a run-in phase where you're getting pacing only. And then all patients go through a setup procedure with BackBeat. It's really done through a programmer. We know that BackBeat can be activated. Then the patients are randomized. Only the treatment arm patients get BackBeat. The other arm is getting pacing alone. Neither the patient or the physician knows, treating physician knows who's in what arm. And that's important because running device-based hypertension studies with sham control has been, one of the difficult things in this space. So we have a therapy that lends itself very nicely. The primary endpoints we use for measuring blood pressure is 24-hour ambulatory systolic blood pressure. So it's important to note that you're taking measurements through the whole course of the day. You're really getting a sensitive reading of what's the therapy doing, not just on a time point, but really to the blood pressure profile of the patient. I'm going to bring this slide up now so you can see the data. I apologize for the delay. You can see, as the slide comes online, BackBeat drove at 6 months follow-up a 11 millimeter drop in ambulatory systolic blood pressure. That's compared to 3 in the control arm. So a statistically significant reduction of ambulatory systolic blood pressure of over 8 millimeters of mercury. This is a substantial effect. If you look at office systolic blood pressure, which is a standard cuff reading, the effect was more pronounced. And actually, with 24 months follow-up post the blinding period, the effect actually increased to 17.5 millimeters. So the data, we're really proud of this. This is a 50-patient study, so seeing statistical significance in a relatively small pilot study is impressive. The safety results, we're looking at major adverse cardiac events, favored the BackBeat arm, no events versus a rate of a little under 10% at 6 months in the control arm. This was not at all powered for showing statistical differences. An important note about BackBeat also, we tend to see a very high response rate in patients. So 85% of the treated patients saw a reduction in ambulatory systolic blood pressure. Actually, over half our patients saw a 10 millimeter or greater reduction. And the figure on the right, you're really looking at the baseline ambulatory pressures in the treated group. The orange shows after 6 months, you see a very clear reduction, consistent over the 24-hour period. It's important to note the baselines here were not particularly high. We're in the mid, around 136, 137 millimeters. The effect of BackBeat essentially is bringing these patients to a target blood pressure using that sensitive reading of ambulatory systolic blood pressure. So data that we think really positions us well to the next step of a pivotal study.
So I guess as a former engineer used to design pacemakers, I'm not surprised you can get the physiologic response you're seeking plus the safety. No surprise there. I guess the one thing I would ask is, what don't we know about maybe potential long-term risk of using this as chronic therapy, whether that's due to, both the underlying potential disease progression or, remodeling. So, how or what data do you have that might mitigate any concerns about chronic use?
It's important. We started in the clinic a number of years ago in Moderato 1. So we have anecdotally followed patients out past 6 years and seen a lot of good things in terms of sustained reduction in blood pressure. And so we're excited. We treated overall about 100 patients so far. So, so far we feel really good about the safety profile and about the durable efficacy. The reason we're going to run now a well-powered, multi-center prospective pivotal trials to make sure that we see not just consistency on this type of efficacy, but we look at safety signal in a randomized study with enough power to make sure that the therapy performs favorably against pacing alone. And hopefully we begin to see trends that will show the benefit of lowering blood pressure. It's really important to note that elevated blood pressure is not just the number one comorbidity, but it's going to be the number one driver of morbid and mortal events in these patients. Blood pressure really is what drives MIs, strokes, progression to heart failure, progression to end-stage kidney disease. So we feel that the safety outlook for BackBeat is not just about not being inferior, but hopefully over time showing the advantages of it's something that can significantly, with a high response rate, and durably lower blood pressure. So we don't have any obvious concerns, but since this is a novel algorithm, we're going to go run the studies in collaboration with Medtronic to make sure we have that data to ultimately submit to the FDA and other regulatory agencies. And the study we plan to run will number in the hundreds of patients, so we think we'll have the data necessary to support the adoption of the technology and commercialization.
Well, great. So I know you're about to embark on the pivotal study in the second half of the year. At least from where you're standing right now, can you give us some of the basics of what the study might look like as far as number of patients, maybe number of centers, and the primary endpoint?
Sure. Sorry, I went one too far. This just is an outline that of what we've shared publicly so far. I apologize. Let me bring that back one. Computer is responding slow. So this will be a prospective multi-center study, also randomized and double-blinded, same target patient population that we've already treated as we talked about. So really similar to our previous studies in terms of the enrolled patients. We think the endpoint will be the same change in 24-hour ambulatory systolic blood pressure. We expect it to be at 3 months rather than 6. We feel confident in our data in both cases. The reason that we think the endpoint will be shorter here is just looking at trends in other both pharmaceutical and device-based hypertension studies. The longer you try and blind and randomize, the more variability there tends to be in both prescribed, and particularly prescribed medication in the control arm. We saw this with renal denervation. So generally the trend has been to shorter endpoints. So we think the primary same endpoint, but with a 3-month time frame. Safety, will look at longer safety time points. So we haven't yet finalized the study design. We're going to be doing that shortly and announcing that with our IDE approval. But our safety evaluations will look at actually 12 and all the way through 24 months, which will be important to follow up. But the primary efficacy and safety endpoints likely will be shorter. We expect to be in a number of centers in the United States, Europe, potentially Japan if we have to do centers over there. We've talked about as many as 80 centers. Doing a large study like this with collaboration with Medtronic is much more feasible. So we want to be in a number of centers, both to accelerate enrollment and also get good experience in those centers to support and be in a good position to help Medtronic really hit the ground running, which won't be really hard for them. They're obviously very well positioned already as the market leader in pacing. We've talked about hundreds of patients. We're looking forward to sharing the sample size. We're optimistic that this is going to be a more efficient study than maybe we've even indicated previously.
Great. And what are the remaining gating items before you commence the study?
Sure. We've been actively engaged with the FDA, we, Medtronic, our clinical steering committee, really finalizing integration of their feedback into the study design and then getting IDE approval to commence the study. So we think we're in good position to have that happen here over the next several months and get the study underway in the second half of the year, which is what we've guided to. A lot of organizational work's already gone on in terms of gearing up centers, planning the execution of the study. And then importantly, Medtronic has been doing with our support, all the integration and testing of the device. This study will be done with a already approved Medtronic device. The devices in this study, and this is different than our other studies, will be already implanted. So there won't be implants in the study. The therapy will be downloaded into implanted devices for the purposes of the clinical trial. So we actually that'll help with enrollment. It'll help with simplifying the study in many ways, because you'll be able to take people to meet our inclusion criteria, but without having to include the implant. And that's not the way we did our previous studies. That's a big advantage of having a partner like Medtronic that's the market leader. So we feel we're really well positioned here and looking forward to sharing more detail around the study design as it becomes available, and obviously outlining our timelines for enrollment and data presentation. That'll be coming shortly here as we move into the second half.
Well, great. So let's shift to the commercial opportunity for BackBeat. And as you stated, last year you entered into one of your two key partnerships, this one with Medtronic, to develop and commercialize BackBeat for this initial indication as a treatment for hypertension in patients already indicated for a cardiac pacemaker. So maybe you've touched on a number of these points, but maybe just summarize again the advantages and some of the key details of your partnership with Medtronic, who, as you mentioned, is the largest player in the implantable CRM market, which is an oligopoly. So, you know, it's a great position to have. They're probably the best partner to collaborate with.
Yeah, I think you said that well. So while there's other players in the market, Medtronic is twice as big as their nearest competitor in terms of market share, certainly in the US and in most of the key markets worldwide. Pacemakers have been a core business for Medtronic from inception, so this is an essential business to them. As I've already talked about, our partnership gives us access to their market-leading device platforms that are prolific, and to the resources that really only a company like Medtronic has in this sector. So the integration testing work has been done by their people. As we're moving forward, it's our study and we're controlling it, but a lot of key clinical regulatory resources have been made available to Orchestra through this collaborative structure. And then clearly the commercial work will be done entirely by Medtronic. So I think those things really make possible, this program in a way that, on our own would have been very difficult. And then importantly, as we look ahead to post a successful study, the commercial opportunity, we think this can be an important growth driver for the pacemaker business in Medtronic, and an important source of revenue to Orchestra through our revenue share. And as I mentioned before, as we talk about the addressable market opportunity, keep in mind the assumption here that what we and Medtronic have shared, that Orchestra will get between $500 and $1,600 per device, but without any need for changing existing reimbursement. We think that this product can be commercialized as a premium, high-impact therapy into the existing market using existing reimbursement, where there is upside value for Medtronic, but also a significant revenue share for Orchestra. And to your question, the market opportunity in the first indication, I'm sorry to be flipping back through the slides, of hypertension in the pacemaker population. So this is the number one comorbidity, affecting upwards of 70% of patients. You look worldwide, that's 750,000 patients annually. About 1.1 million pacemakers are implanted. So if you just do some math, take the low midpoint of the range, that means that the royalty opportunity for Orchestra is as much as $750 million annually. Now, clearly, that's the whole market. Medtronic is, we think, the best partner to be able to pursue that large opportunity, but no one gets all of the market opportunity. But we see the total value of that being as much as a potential increase of $2 billion for the existing pacemaker opportunity, a big opportunity for them, big opportunity for us. Now, there are expansion opportunities into what we call high-risk hypertension. I'm happy to discuss, but really we're talking about treating the same demographic of patients, older patients with significant hypertension and comorbidities, but it's a small fraction of the over 1 billion patients that have hypertension worldwide. So really targeted demographic where you'd be talking about the same device, same implant, but where hypertension would be the main driver. And we think that's an over $8 billion new market opportunity, and Medtronic has a right of first negotiation to expand their partnership with us to that indication.
Yeah, so let's maybe dive a little deeper into two aspects of this. One, give us a sense of an ASP right now for a premium pacemaker, and then if we have an added feature to treat hypertension, what might the price premium for that feature be? And I think it's important to reiterate again the idea that this is same device, same implant, just let's call it different software, which is,
Sure.
back again when I was a design engineer for pacemakers, the key program we worked on was changing the state machine nature of the pacemaker from hardware to software, which allowed these type of upgrades to all be made available from the same device. So you're making the same device every time, just charging a different premium for what software you might have turned on. So give us a sense of average price for a premium device and what this feature might add.
Sure.
As a bonus.
And pricing really is carefully guarded by by the market players here like Medtronic and their competitors. So I think what I'll talk about is more reimbursement and how it relates to price. Why I say pricing is guarded is because pacemakers tend to be sold in contract bundles along with other CRM devices. It's a big part of how market share is both acquired and maintained by the largest players like Medtronic. Reimbursement, though, in this space has been robust and stable. So about half the patients get pacemakers on an inpatient DRG basis, about half do it on an outpatient, might favor outpatient a little bit. But roughly, if we think about it half and half, the device portion of those reimbursements tends to support reimbursements in the $6,500 to $8,000 range for devices. But the contract prices are going to tend to be meaningfully below that. And it'll depend on the hospital, the contract, the device. Premium pacemaker is going to be MRI compatible. It's going to have a number of advanced pacing features that have been developed by companies like Medtronic. Because there tends to be commoditization and not significant differentiation, and price competition and contracting becomes important. When new differentiated features, and probably the most substantial was MRI compatibility. There's some other pacing algorithms come out that tends to be an advantage for one of the players. Medtronic tends to be at the cutting edge of this, and things like leadless pacing and conduction system pacing, they've been continuing to lead. But those price differentials are often hard to sustain. So BackBeat is pretty interesting because you're talking about a key differentiator that is supported by a very significant IP portfolio that we developed and licensed to Medtronic, that we think has protections that are going to last a long time. It's treating now an entirely new indication. That's quite novel. I haven't seen that. The best comparison would be how pacing got expanded into biventricular for CRT for heart failure, but you really needed to change the device. We don't do that. Here, you're offering a new pathway to an on-label indication that's highly prevalent in the existing patient population that requires significant clinical trials to be able to validate and regulatory labeling to approve. So we think the differentiation is quite impactful and quite sustainable. And so there's an opportunity to allow those devices that maybe sell under contracts well below the reimbursement to be premium priced. And keep in mind, these are profitable devices already. Anything you do to bring pricing up and differentiation means that the profit margins can increase, the growth can increase, the market share can increase, and this could have huge value to even a market leader like Medtronic, given the size of this business and the contribution margin of the business. So the dynamics are really favorable to a technology like this, particularly positioned with the market leader.
Yeah, I think one of the points there that shouldn't be lost is the way that these products are, the bundled nature under which these products are sold to the hospital, and Medtronic having that access in a preferential position to be able to introduce this device, and then having the existing reimbursement, another key component that drives the rate of adoption. And so, given all that, maybe can you cite for some of the more recent add-ons what type of speed of adoption we saw for those features and what we might expect here?
I think that, there's, if you look at MRI compatibility, particularly in key markets like the United States, that's become the predominant type of pacemaker that is implanted. The growth from the market introduction to kind of sustained dominant market share really happened within a 3 to 4 year period. So when something in pacemakers comes out that has added value and differentiation, it can be adopted and really saturate the market potential quite quickly, particularly if you're in market. And MRI compatibility was introduced first by Medtronic. I believe they had a roughly 18-month advantage over competitors. So leverage the advantage, not just for market share, but for added value. And now I think, a fair estimate would be maybe 2 out of every 3 pacemakers sold in the United States have MRI compatibility.
Okay, great. And then maybe just a final question about BackBeat, and that's beyond this initial indication, how confident are you for the prospects of BackBeat to address additional cardiac indications such as heart failure?
Well, first and foremost, I'd focus on this opportunity on the screen right now of addressing high-risk hypertension, because we're excited about that. The natural course would be to do what we're doing is focus on the patients that are already getting the implant, where we don't have to implant a patient with a device for hypertension alone. We're giving the benefit of hypertension therapy on top of the implant they have. And it's the ideal population also to do your key study, because we can do, as I described, a really well-designed, double-blind, randomized study, which is always preferred if you can conduct them. It would be difficult to do that kind of sham-controlled study in a patient population that didn't already need the pacemaker. So we think the study that we're going to embark on this year is going to be really the seminal data that's going to be able to evaluate efficacy and safety, and that will give us benchmark information that should allow us to really clearly pursue, once again, this targeted population of high-risk hypertension, where the implant would be for the benefit of hypertension alone. The good thing about this is pacemakers have been around for decades. We know the safety track record of pacemakers. Physicians broadly know how to implant them. Hospitals know how to support them. And now we're talking about potentially a novel device that would be implanted in older patients with significant hypertension disease at high risk. And in many ways, the work associated and the reimbursement pathways are also established. So we see this expansion market as really tangible and addressable, and hopefully something we can pursue in a remarkably efficient manner after we get the data in the first indication, which is obviously quite large, and we think we've got the right partner to go after that. So we're excited about what we can do in hypertension. In heart failure, the therapy, and this is data that we've shown, one of the things that's really driving, if you look at hypertension, is an insidious driver of heart failure. Hypertension is reflective of a heart that's working harder than it needs to oxygenate the body. That extra work puts extra strain on the heart, and it tends to be that insidious contributor to cardiomyopathy, both on the right and left side of the heart. So in many ways, by treating hypertension, you're having benefits, towards preventing or progression to or development of heart failure. If you look at our mechanism, the mechanism also, as I talked about earlier, while we affect cardiac preload as the key mechanism to lower blood pressure, the modulation that we do, blood pressure and of AV intervals, really, we think also downregulates autonomic activity, and sympathetic tone is a key factor also in driving the insidious progression of heart failure. So we think that on its own, there may be a benefit to what we call cardiac neuromodulation therapy for heart failure, not just through blood pressure modification, but through autonomic downregulation. So there's both a direct approach using our hypertension therapy, and we think in the future, novel algorithms based on our intellectual property, our technology that may be more targeted to specific heart failure patients.
Well, great. Well, we'll get to those when we get to those, but I think huge opportunity for BackBeat just in the implanted pacemaker
Exactly.
population.
It's a great first indication. We're really excited about the next steps.
So let's switch to your second key product, which is Virtue SAB. When I first became a med device analyst, I had a front row seat to the advancements in percutaneous transluminal coronary angioplasty, starting with, the introduction of balloon angioplasty, which necessitated the need for bare metal stents, which then necessitated the need for drug-eluting stents. And while all of this represented significant innovation, the goal remains to leave nothing behind. So can you discuss what has limited the progression of drug-coated balloon technology over the past decade, where we still sit with no drug-coated balloon yet approved in the US for coronary indications, and why Virtue represents differentiated DCB technology?
Well, sure. And so, this is interventional cardiology, treating atherosclerotic disease in the heart as well as in the periphery is still one of the mainstays of interventional medicine, a large market. And you talked about a market that involved the evolution of various devices like balloon angioplasty, stents, drug-eluting stents. But the key trend you mentioned is leave nothing behind. Euro PCR was last month, TCT last fall, it's coming up again. Major theme is the idea that, can we move away from permanent metal implants in key indications and maybe more broadly over time. A stent is particularly drug-eluting stents have made a big impact, but you do leave that stent and metal in the heart forever. And that's associated with known risk of re-stenosis as well as acute thrombosis in patients, and it's cumulative. Every year you have the device. So there's a strong interest in the idea of leave nothing behind solutions. And the most promising technologies are drug-eluting balloons. You talk about drug-coated balloons. Our product actually is the only non-coated angioplasty system that also delivers drug. So limitations have been a few things. One has been which drug is made available as a coating. The predominant drug on drug-coated balloons is paclitaxel. So go back to your earlier days covering the emergence of drug-eluting stents, and you remember that the drug on J&J's first drug-eluting stent, they introduced drug-eluting stents, the Cypher stent, was sirolimus or rapamycin. It's a generic name. Boston Scientific's answer was Taxus, which used paclitaxel. And there's a ton of data comparing those devices. And all of the data made very clear that the limuses, sirolimus, was both more efficacious and safer than paclitaxel. And today you won't find any paclitaxel-coated stents anywhere, but you will find paclitaxel-coated balloons. Paclitaxel-coated balloons have been commercialized for treatment of the SFA in the United States, not for coronaries yet. They're used outside the United States, both in the periphery and in coronaries. The data's good. Why paclitaxel? Why has it made a comeback on balloons? Not because it's better, but because it's easier, much easier to make a coating out of paclitaxel. And that has to do with both the chemistry of the drug and its hydrophilicity and those dynamics, and more importantly, its mechanism. Paclitaxel is a cytotoxic drug that really is designed to kill. Its purpose is to kill proliferating cells on contact, really. It's used as a chemotherapy agent. So the idea of using drugs in this indication is expanding an artery that's blocked by plaque using a high pressure balloon, one, it revascularizes, but it creates a lot of injury and inflammation. The role of the drugs is to stop that activity, that proliferation, inflammation, so that the vessel can heal and remain now more open. Paclitaxel does that by killing all of those active cells. What made sirolimus a really interesting drug and is proven to be the gold standard is because it doesn't kill cells, it stops cell proliferation while the drug is present. So drug-eluting stents are a great platform for delivering a drug like that. That actually has a very short half-life, but its mechanism needs to be there for over 30 days. Actually, some of the elution profiles are even longer. So a stent is a great way to deliver a drug like that, but if you're doing just a balloon, which goes in the body, is inflated for 30 to 60 seconds, you take it out. The challenge is, how do you get a drug that needs to be there for 30 days to do its job, to get into the vessel and stay for the time it needs to work? Once again, a stent is permanent, so it becomes a great platform. For drug-coated balloons, paclitaxel became favored because it's much easier to coat the balloon. And when you're dealing with a balloon coating, you're dealing with a fragile coating that's designed to come off. So it's designed to go from balloon to vessel. But that means it also comes off in blood flow. You have drug loss in transit. You have particulate from the coating and the excipients that go with the coating that can flow downstream. And all drug-coated balloons have this problem. They have another problem for the operator. Because of those factors, the IFUs really encourage physicians to deploy the balloon as quickly as possible once they enter the body. We approached our product, Virtue, with intentional we had intentional design really to try and solve those issues. So these are large markets, but we really designed the balloon and the approach to the drug differently to be able to get sirolimus available through a balloon. We know it's a better drug, and also to eliminate the challenges of a coating, both in terms of drug loss, the rushing effect, and of having to get there quickly, and the particulate effect. So our AngioInfusion balloon really is different. It's a plain balloon, nothing on the surface. It has very specifically designed micro holes in the surface of the balloon. And we're actually delivering the drug formulation through the balloon. The drug formulation is the inflation media. So you can see in that illustration on the top left, the physician, as they're inflating the balloon, actually sees the dose of drug go through the balloon. They know they've delivered it. What they're delivering, though, is importantly different and empowered to help uptake, and then that extended release that you need with sirolimus, because once again, there's no stent. And what you see on the right, this is really important. This is peer-reviewed published data from a large animal series of work we did in developing the product. We've done a lot more work that hasn't been published, but this really is the key proof point. What you're seeing in the square box, the orange boxes, are the drug delivered to the target lesion in these animal vessels. These are coronary arteries. It's a large payload of drug, so this is a log scale. We actually can deliver more drug than goes on a stent, and we can keep that drug well above the known therapeutic concentration, which is 1 nanogram per milligram of tissue, out past 30 days. You see that clearly in the elution profile. What's amazing about this targeted system is, if you look at distal myocardial tissue, end organs like kidney, liver, and lung, really by day 4, you can't detect the drug there at all. So while there is some drug that gets downstream, it's at very, very low subtherapeutic doses, and it's really gone very quickly. So we built a very different product than coated balloons, and we think it's necessary to make the drug of choice available and to eliminate the challenges we have with coatings. And that's been part of the reason. Paclitaxel coated balloons are being developed for the US in coronaries. We expect Boston Scientific to be the first with their agent balloon, as a paclitaxel coated balloon. The first indication will be coronary and stent restenosis, and we're rooting for Boston. We think that Boston does a great job of bringing new technology into the cardiovascular space, of making sure that those products command the appropriate premium prices and that adoption and the change of standard of care habits. But meanwhile, we think, a much better and differentiated solution that brings sirolimus and non-coating coming fast behind them. And we have a great partner in Terumo that's well positioned launch that product. So we think there is a sea change coming, and we think we have a key role to play in it with our technology.
Well, great. And the one thing we know about interventional cardiology is that a newer, better product gets quickly adopted. So here again, can you review the key findings of your clinical data to date and how this informs the design of your pivotal study?
Sure. So this is our SABRE study, which focused on our lead indication, which is coronary in-stent restenosis. So what is in-stent restenosis? That's patients that have received a stent previously, but where that stent now needs reintervention. The vessel is clogged around, is blocked again around the stent. And that's actually really important point to note. We talked about indications where, there's great value in stents, but where the challenges, the long-term challenges of stents are obvious. This is probably the most obvious one. And so this is data from a multi-center study we ran with Virtue in Europe. In this target patient population, the per protocol data is for single layer in-stent restenosis. Patients do get a second layer of stents sometimes, and we'll study those as well. But that's the randomized pivotal data that we'll be generating. And so it's important to look at how we did in that single layer stent. And we think this is best in class data. The most important data point is the second line on the top right, or target lesion failure at 1 year. That'll be the primary safety and efficacy endpoint. What target lesion failure refers to is, did the patient need a reintervention? Did the treatment not work? Or did the patient have a major adverse cardiac event? So it's a composite of those. 2.8% at 1 year is an outstanding result in this type of patient population. Other data you'll see there, late lumen loss. If you remember, we reopened the vessel measured by angiography. How much at 6 months of that gained luminal space has been lost. 0.12 millimeters is once again an outstanding result in treating ISR. And then the last data point, target lesion revascularization, that's part of target lesion failure. That's, did the patient need another reintervention? Here we're looking at the longer term follow-up. After a year, between 1 and 3 years, did these patients need another treatment? And we had no TLR in this study. And we think our data really compares very favorable to other drug-coated balloons, paclitaxel products, where there's data available. So this is the pilot data. And as you asked, what will the pivotal data be, or pivotal trial design be? And so this is what we've shared so far in terms of the study we expect to begin later this year. This study we refer to as the Virtue ISR US study. It'll have both a randomized arm in the single layer stents, so the same population I just described our SABRE data in, a 2-to-1 randomization of Virtue versus plain balloon angioplasty, looking at target lesion failure at 12 months, that endpoint where we had 2.8%. We believe this study is well powered, actually based on assumptions that Virtue can perform not as favorably as we've seen previously, and that plain balloons can do better than they typically do. And we still think we're positioned with high probability with robust powering to win this study. We'll also enroll 100 patients in a single arm where we'll look at 2 layers of stents. So these are patients that have had ISR, got another stent on top of the first one to treat it, and now are coming back again. Much more difficult to treat. And here we'll also get 100 patients, so we have clinical data to support use of the product in that indication. And we think this study, which we expect to run in up to 50 centers in the US, which has been well organized, and really we're readying this study to go. We hope to be enrolling that study once again in the second half of this year. We've estimated 12 to 18 months in enrollment with a 12-month primary endpoint.
Okay, well, great. So for Virtue, your partner is Terumo, and while this is a slightly more competitive market than CRM, what strengths does Terumo have?
Well, Terumo, for those that don't know, and Terumo's the oldest medical device company in Japan. They've been making medical devices for well over 100 years. headquartered in Tokyo, but a global business. And interventional cardiology is their largest business segment, generates over $2.5 billion of annual revenue, over 40% of their global revenue. And Terumo's a leader in a lot of areas in terms of accessory and enabling devices for interventional cardiology. Probably the most important is radial access. So, as you know, procedures like percutaneous coronary interventions have been moving from access through the femoral artery in the groin to access through the radial artery in the arm. A lot easier for the patient, a lot easier for the physician, less traumatic, and allows speed of procedures. And Terumo's really been the global innovator in terms of driving transradial access for years. Transradial access is now more than the majority of interventions globally. It's actually probably the super majority, and I'd estimate that 2/3 of PCI is now done transradially, and Terumo dominates that market in terms of the transradial access solutions that physicians need. They also provide great additional accessory devices. What they don't have, particularly in the US, is a flagship therapeutic product. So one of the things that made us excited to align with Terumo is they're really well positioned. They're in most cath labs, if not all, and they have a strong commercial organization in this market. But they looked at Virtue as a potential flagship therapeutic product to layer on top of their existing market position. And our business model is all about alignment. We need to be aligned with our partners. We need to be, looking not just at short-term but long-term alignment. We thought Terumo was a great partner for this kind of product, given that it can fit really nicely in their portfolio, and they can think about fully pursuing the potential opportunities that Virtue opens up for both coronary and the future peripheral treatment.
Okay, great. And then can you provide some basics about the current market dynamics, including differences between the markets in the US and Europe, and what kind of price premium Virtue SAB might command?
Yeah, I mean, it's too early to talk about pricing. Actually, what we're going to watch in the US, since we think Boston is likely going to be launching their paclitaxel-coated balloon, is we think there are significant price premiums available for these products, because clearly you're doing away with putting more metal in, lowering long-term potential complications, dual antiplatelet therapy, and hope for giving better therapy to patients. Outside the United States, you're seeing paclitaxel-coated balloons become, in certain indications, like in stent restenosis, like in coronary small vessel, actually oftentimes a significant, if not the majority chosen technology versus stents. This is happening in Europe, it's happening in Japan, all based on paclitaxel products. So we believe the US, sadly, is well behind other key markets in the use of balloon technology to treat key coronary and peripheral indications. So, in the US, we do have SFA, and frankly, there isn't yet a clear winner in terms of below the knee treatments with balloons. When the coronaries, adoption is rapidly growing in these indications outside the US, so we think that's going to happen in the US once products become available. There aren't good sirolimus-based solutions available. We can talk more about why that is. We really believe ours is going to be the key enabling technology to make that possible. There are significant price premiums in markets like Japan. European market's difficult. There's price differences country to country in Europe, as you know. Some markets where you command significant premiums, some not yet. But once again, balloons are differentiated and generally commanding prices that are well above stents in most markets.
Okay, great. Well, we've got an hour here, so let me ask you one final question, and that would be, from your perspective, what do you think investors really need to fully understand to really appreciate the Orchestra opportunity?
Well, I think that it's important to understand that what we're doing is very different than other emerging medtech companies that investors track in the public market. We are practicing a different business model. It's a business model that, as I talked about earlier, we think can be powerful for enabling innovation and positioning partners to grow. But it really means that what we're spending money on and time on is fundamentally proving technologies through clinical trials, not spending money on commercialization. We're relying on these established, much better positioned companies like Medtronic and Terumo to do that very expensive work of commercialization. Therefore, and we're doing that with partnerships, as I've demonstrated, that have significant revenue shares back to us that are long-term. So we believe that as we move in the next few years through the development phase of the pivotal development phase of BackBeat and Virtue, and frankly, any other program we may add in the future into commercialization, our top line growth can be substantial, but the drop of that revenue to the bottom line of our P&L can be pretty dramatic. And that there's sustainable opportunities for this business model. There is a wealth of innovation that really isn't getting funded or isn't getting moved along fast enough, and our model's designed to enable some of that in a different collaborative way. So we think we built a different business. It's at the right time. There's so much opportunity for new technology that just isn't getting funded. We've got two incredible programs we're really proud of with great partners. We're at a late stage here. The time now to data is going to be relatively short, and that there's a very significant long arc of value that we can generate with BackBeat and Virtue, and that the model is going to create other opportunities in the future. The other important point is we're well funded. Our capital is going to last into 2026. We think through these key data points where really they enable handoffs to our partners. And our partners and some of the leading healthcare investors out there like RTW and Perceptive are our key shareholder base. So we feel really, really good about how we've set up the business, how we set up the pipeline, the programs, capitalize the business, and the shareholder base we have to pursue an opportunity here. And we're excited to have this conversation and continue to grow our shareholder base as we continue to pursue and execute on the business.
Well, great. Well, David, thank you so much for joining us today. For anyone in our audience who'd like to follow up with management, we can certainly facilitate that. Just reach out to our corporate access group. And with that, I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and have a good rest of your day.
Thanks so much, Kay. Thank you, everyone.